जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी। गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी। गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी। राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी। गोपीजन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी। यशोदानंदन व्रजजनरंजन। 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 यमुनातीरवनचारी। जय जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी। जय जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। जयम विष्णुपद परम सुरजगाचार्य अष्टोत्तरशत श्री श्रीमद श्रील अभय चरणानंद भक्ति वेदांत महाराज श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। आनंद कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। नामाचार्य श्रील ठाकुर हरिदास की जय। प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंद राधा कुंद गिरि गोवर्धन की जय। वृंदावन धाम की जय। नवद्वीप मायापुर धाम की जय। गंगा देवी की जय। यमुना मई की जय। भक्ति देवी की जय। तुलसी महारानी की जय। समवेत भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय। ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। ISKCON BBC संस्थापक आचार्य श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। गौ प्रेमानंदी। All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. Jai Shri Prabhupada. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Gnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Yudapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute. Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hare Priye. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. This morning we'll read from the Sri Brhad Bhagavatamrta of Srila Sanatana Goswami. And I was asked to say something about dainya, humility. And there's a nice passage about that here. So we can read, beginning from around text 200 or so, in the chapter entitled Prema, Love of Godhead. This is this is part 2, and this is chapter 5 of, actually part 2 has 2 parts, and this is chapter 5 of part 2. Sanatana Goswami, as you know, was the chief disciple of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and elder brother Srila Rupa Goswami. His Brhad Bhagavatamrta is in many ways, as one older godbrother put it, the doorway to the realm of Raganuga Bhakti. And it's a very, very important book because although it only implicitly accepts all the principles of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings about Lord Krishna and his eternal associates, it's very, very deep, and its content was later on solidified and substantiated by Rupa Goswami in his Lagu Bhagavatamrta. So in this chapter, Prema, Love of Godhead, we're hearing a few things, but this is Gopa Kumar speaking. He was just speaking with Narad Muni, and now he continues. Actually, we'll begin with Narad's advice to Gopakumara in text number 209. He says, "Please hear from me this one piece of advice. Not far from here lies the Lord's holy abode known as Sri Purushottam Kshetra, which you visited before on earth. The transcendental abode of Lord Jagannath on earth is also present in Vaikuntha." This is the commentary. "There, in the company of Subhadra and Balaram, Lord Purushottam enjoys the same sports he enacted at Govardhan and in the Vrindavan forest and on the shores of the Yamuna." Commentary: Lord Jagannath is Krishna himself. By visiting Purushottam Kshetra in Vaikuntha, Gopakumar will be able to see the object of his worship, Lord Krishna, enjoying his favorite pastimes. His transcendental form, the one source of all incarnations, expands all of his various pastimes. Whichever of his forms a devotee finds attractive, that form the Lord shows him. Commentary: within Lord Jagannath, Gopakumar will be able to see all the different forms of the Supreme Lord, for Lord Jagannath shows himself as one incarnation of Vishnu or another at suitable times and places by displaying that incarnation's pastimes. Gopakumar may doubt whether all his desires can be fulfilled by Lord Jagannath, whose form differs from that of Madan Gopal. After all, Gopakumar's heart belongs only to Madan Gopal, who alone can attract him. To remove this doubt, Narad speaks the second half of this verse, which is, "Yasmai charocheta yat asya rupam bhaktaya tasmai khalu darshayet tat." Whichever of his forms a devotee finds attractive, that form the Lord shows him. Eternally as dear to Sri Krishna Deva as his beautiful Mathura Dham is that Purushottam Kshetra. There, the Lord displays his supreme opulence and yet charms his devotees by acting like an ordinary person of the world. since it's Purushottama Mas, we'll hear a little more. The commentary says, Gopakumar may still insist that Krishna reveals himself in full sweetness only in his favorite abode, Vrajabhumi, and Gopakumar may therefore not want to go anywhere else. But here, Narad explains that in Purushottama Kshetra, non-different from Vraj, Krishna also manifests all his powers of Godhead and all his sweetness. Lord Jagannath's being the complete omnipotent personality of Godhead is confirmed in the Shiva Purana. Quote, the unlimited, imperishable Vishnu, the primeval supreme person, abides there in Puri. That Lord who is very kind to his devotees bestows liberation in 7 ways. His devotees in Puri are liberated by remembering him, by eating remnants of his food, by making a pilgrimage, by repeatedly chanting his names, by living in that abode, by giving up their life heirs, or by seeing him. Skanda Purana confirms, quote, the same being who created this universe with all its moving and non-moving creatures is present in Sri Kshetra in the form of wood, like the living soul of that abode. End quote. Therefore, since Krishna enjoys with the same freedom in Puri as in Vrajabhumi, Gopakumar should be able to achieve in Puri everything he desires. And if you're still not fully satisfied after going there and seeing him, then at least stay there for some time as the means to achieve your desired goal. Of course, your ultimate goal is pure love for the lotus feet of Krishna, the divine gopis' life and soul. Love that follows the mood of the Lord's own Vrajabhumi. You seek no other goal than that. But the prime cause of pure love for Sri Krishna is Krishna's full mercy, which in someone may arise spontaneously, and in someone else by gradual practice of devotional service. Just as from a generous donor one might receive food already cooked, or the means and ingredients for cooking food oneself. So according to the opinions of Scripture, one receives Krishna's mercy through a method of devotional practice, either regulative or spontaneous. Commentary. Though all perfection in bhakti comes only by Krishna's mercy, there is still a need for different methods of sadhana. To illustrate the point, we may consider the hungry people who should receive charity. Some should be given food already cooked and offered to the Supreme Lord. Others, like strict brahmanas, who eat only what they have cooked themselves and offer to their own deities, should be given rice, other ingredients, and pots and fuel for cooking. Similarly, most aspiring Vaishnavas need to be purified from material contamination by regulative devotional practice. Only a few souls, already pure, can enter directly into spontaneous loving service. In the old days, the brahmanas used to cook for themselves. We find in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that when one itinerant brahmana came to visit Jagannath Mishra, and he was worshipping Gopal, and Jagannath Mishra gave him all the samagri for cooking, and he cooked himself because they would not accept things that cooked by anyone else. Even Srila Prabhupada actually said on one lecture I heard, when he was in maybe Allahabad, he saw that sometimes there were strict Brahmins being kept as judges. They were employed as judges of some sort. And when they were working there in the police station or in the court, there was a special place that they could go to cook for themselves. Even their wives, they wouldn't even bring something from home cooked by their wives. They themselves would cook. So every Brahmin had his own cooker and had his own tiffin and everything, and he cooked for himself. That's the principle. Minor detail, but interesting. So, once one has overcome the obstacles on the path that arise from frailties like fear, one can then achieve pure love, in which one thinks of the Lord like a close friend in the ordinary world. For this, one must have a strong desire to serve the Lord in the manner of his gopas and gopis. Commentary. When a serious devotee first sets his aim on following in the footsteps of the Golokavasis, the goal may seem far away. He may begin his endeavor still encumbered by many material desires. But the more he carefully studies the transcendental reality, the more he renounces his unsuitable desires. He then rises above the misgivings born of fear, reverence, distrust, and shame. Anybody ever feel afraid? Anyone feel reverent? Anyone here distrustful? One person raises her hand. Anyone here feel shame? So this is relevant to us. These are considered to be anartas here in the commentary. The real beginning of spiritual life, therefore, is to become free from material desires. Until the obstacles are overcome, the devotee sees the object of his devotion only as the Supreme Powerful, and so remains too fearful and respectful to have any real love for him. But later, when the devotee swims in the vast ocean of bhakti, the superficial waves of contrary impulses recede, and he is granted the superintelligence for friendship with the Supreme. The devotee then approaches the Lord with such apparently worldly moods as that of a consort or a son, and serves his lotus feet accordingly. He renders pure devotional service, as defined in Padma Purana. Ananya mamata Vishno mamata prema sanyuta bhaktir iti uchyate bhishma prahladodhava naradaihi. When one develops an unflinching sense of ownership or possessiveness in relation to Lord Vishnu, or in other words, when one thinks Lord Vishnu and no one else to be the only object of love, such an awakening is called bhakti by exalted persons like Bhishma, Prahlada, Uddhava, and Narada. Text 218. One develops that love by practicing the devotional service whose main ways are meditation on and singing about the many vraja pastimes of the Lord. That service becomes brilliant by sankirtana of the Lord's most beloved holy names. Commentary. Vaidhi sadhana bhakti, which consists of 9 basic devotional practices, beginning with hearing, chanting, and remembering, prepares a devotee's heart for the awakening of prema, love of God. Dhyana and gana, the general methods of remembering and chanting about the Supreme Lord and his pastimes, transform in the advanced stages of sadhana into preshtanama sankirtana, ecstatic absorption in the nectarian pastimes of one's worshipable Lord. This sankirtana is the most essential means for achieving prema. By nama sankirtana, one easily realizes the full glories of Krishna and his pleasure potency. Text 219. Tad eka rasa lokasya sange abhivyaktatam swataha prayasyad api tad vastu gopaniyam prayatnataha. In the company of people whose only taste is for devotional service in pure love, that love appears of its own accord, yet one must try hard to keep it concealed. Commentary: the quickest way to achieve prema is to stay in the company of those who know its value. The association of first-class pure Vaishnavas has the power to evoke prema in an aspirant's heart. But when love for Krishna begins to mature, a devotee must be careful not to make a public show of his ecstasy. There is a saying, Gopayet matra jaravat. One should keep prema hidden as one would conceal that one's mother has a paramour. A devotee actually experiencing prema would never divulge his inner ecstasies just to establish a reputation for himself among Vaishnavas. Still, as indicated here, by the word swataha, of its own accord, the situation of an ecstatic devotee is like that of an ordinary person separated from a loved one long enough for time to have covered the pain, yet not so long that meeting friends of his beloved won't suddenly plunge him again into agony. Shall I read that again? The situation of an ecstatic devotee is like that of an ordinary person separated from a loved one long enough for time to have covered the pain, yet not so long that meeting friends of his beloved won't suddenly plunge him again into agony. The word prayasyat is in a future tense, which implies that the injunction to keep prema hidden applies only before prema has fully appeared. Once fully developed, prema cannot be checked from showing itself whenever it wants. Sometimes Srila Prabhupada would exhibit ecstatic symptoms. Not very often, just a few times. When one resides in seclusion in the land of the Lord's favorite pastime forest, surely such love will soon develop and mature. Commentary: sadhana bhakti performed in Krishna's holy dham is especially conducive to the awakening of prema. That loving devotional service is far different from disciplines such as karma, jnana, and yoga. At every stage, it is decorated by indifference to them. And its root is dainya, utter humility. Commentary: the question here is whether prescribed duties and other methods of purification should be continued along with devotional service. Should one keep on with karma, the following of varnashram regulations, or jnana, the cultivating of discrimination between spirit and matter? What about the eightfold practice of yoga and meditation and samadhi? And what about renunciation, chanting mantras, and other disciplines? Here, nodded answers that although these disciplines, starting with karma, may all assist in the sadhana of love of God, only in the very early stages of devotional practice are they of much use. Once sadhana bhakti has yielded its fruit, raganuga bhakti, spontaneous devotion, and especially once prema has appeared, the fruit of raganuga bhakti, there is no longer any place in a devotee's life for those other practices. Raise your hand if you've already experienced prema. Okay, this is just a check. The fact is that prema is not achievable by other methods, such as karma and jnana. Devotees should therefore disregard those methods and simply busy themselves with the devotional service of hearing, chanting, remembering, and so on. This point has already been discussed in detail at the end of the second chapter of this part of Brhad Bhagavatamrta in the context of the glories of bhakti. Great authorities have said, Kayena dure vrajanam tyajanti, jabantam antah karane hasanti, samadhi yoge cha bahir bhavanti, Sandrishyate kapi Mukunda bhaktihi. Devotional service to Lord Mukunda can be seen personified as it runs far away from those who perform fruitive rituals, and it laughs at those who chant silent mantras in their minds and avoids those who practice meditational yoga. Bhakti in all its phases of practice and achievement in this life and the next is always decorated with the ornament of indifference to material desires. This holds true whether bhakti is performed internally with the subtle body or externally with one's physical body and senses and the body's external possessions. When one allows secondary means and goals to become prominent, one deviates from bhakti. The most essential support and the candidate for pure bhakti must always take help from it is utter humility. The most essential support and a candidate for pure bhakti must always take help from it is utter humility. There is a well-known verse in Bhagavad Gita, everyone knows, Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja ityadi. And there's an ancient controversy surrounding this verse that when Krishna says Sarva dharman parityajya, what exactly does he mean? Does he mean that we should all become amoral or immoral? What does it mean? Krishna himself says twice in Bhagavad Gita also. For example, Yajna dana tapaschaiva pavanani manishinaha. You should never give up sacrifice, charity, and austerity because these things purify even the great souls. So what exactly is he talking about when he says Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja? He has already worked hard in the earlier chapters of Bhagavad Gita to convince Arjuna of the value of these processes. Generally, we hear from the Vaishnava authorities that although one may follow these things, and one actually has to follow these things, but within the mind, the exclusive shelter should be pure devotional service. I often point out in my lectures that Srila Prabhupada has given us an instruction that remains largely unfulfilled, in that he said that the remaining 50% of his mission is varnashram dharma. And that very varnashram dharma would appear to be attacked, or at least discouraged in this verse. After all, he's quoting this verse here. Bhakti runs away from those who perform fruitive rituals, laughs at those who chant silent mantras, and avoids those who practice yoga. So, the idea here is that one has to follow the orders of the spiritual master as the essential element and primary element in bhakti. And if the spiritual master orders one to perform varnashram dharma, then it's not mundane varnashram dharma anymore. Brahmaharpanam brahma havir brahmagno brahmanahutam brahmaiva tena gantavyam brahma karma samadhina. In chapter 4, text 28 of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that for the person who's engaged in Krishna consciousness, everything that person is doing becomes of the same transcendental status. And he gives the example of homa, when we offer fire sacrifice. We're offering butter, we're using a sruk, spoon to ladle. There's a mantra being chanted, there's a priest who's performing it, there's the fire itself, there's the ghee, there's the other ingredients, grains and such that we offer into the fire. Krishna says all these things are on the same platform because they're all dovetailed towards yajna. Similarly, in devotional service, anything that we engage in devotional service becomes of a transcendental category. We're not very concerned about Sonipat or Panipat. Anybody from Haryana knows where these places are. But we're concerned about another battlefield just a few miles up the road, which is Kurukshetra. Why? What's the difference? So many battlefields in Haryana. Why we only care about Kurukshetra? Because Krishna is involved. This is Krishna's place. He spoke Bhagavad Gita there. This is where the gopis came to see if they could bring Krishna back to Vrindavan. It's a very, very crucial place, Kurukshetra, but only because of Krishna. Similarly, a devotee may perform varnashram dharma. We've been instructed to do it ourselves. But his only goal is to please Krishna thereby. He's not thinking of it as something separate. This is the point. His only purpose is ultimately to become Krishna conscious. And that's absolutely essential, because without that, then one cannot actually perform varnashram dharma. You know the verse I'm thinking of from chapter 2 of the first canto? You're all chanting that here, I think. Right? What is it? Dharma svanushrita pungsam notpadiyad yariratim shrama eva hi kevalam. If all this dharma that we're performing, if it doesn't bring us to the point of rati, real love for Krishna, then shrama eva is just a waste of time, just hard labor for nothing. This is essential. It's very, very essential to know this. Bilva Mangala Thakur has written a nice verse. He says that we can have stern thought in philosophy, we can have sensitive thought in literature, we can have ceaseless thought to our responsibilities, only to the degree that we have constant thought of Krishna. And moreover, we've seen in history that when this principle is removed from one's practice of varnashram dharma, when one entertains the idea of something second, dvitiya abhiniveshita syat, then it becomes a fearful situation, because at that point there has to be some desire, there has to be some motive. And unless the motive is to please Krishna, then what will the motive be by default? We please ourselves. Therefore, the varnashram system, which began as a socio-religious system, has now morphed into a economic and political system for exploitation. And it's still very vital and healthy and going strong, even though it's been technically outlawed for many, since Indian independence at least. So varnashram system is always corrupted when we take Krishna out of the picture. Unless Krishna is in the center, it's not possible to properly perform this in a selfless way, which is the ultimate purpose of the varnashram system. So people should understand this. Now, having said that, the real point is this. Loving devotional service is far different from disciplines such as karma, jnana, and yoga. At every stage, it is decorated by indifference to them, and its root is utter humility, dainya. Now the next verse. Yena sa dharana shakta dhamma buddhi sadatmani saravot karashanan vite pyasyad buddhaistad dainyam ishyate. Wise men define dainya as the state in which one always thinks himself exceptionally incapable and low, even when endowed with all excellences. Wise men define dainya as the state in which one always thinks himself exceptionally incapable and low, even when endowed with all excellences. Raise your hand if you're endowed with all excellences. But there are some people who are considered to be endowed with all excellences, and if they consider themselves nonetheless incapable and low, and exceptionally incapable and low, that is called dainya. Commentary. Narada's own definition of dainya distinguishes this use of the word from other possible meanings, such as poverty. Because dinta, what does it mean? Dinta and dainya are the same thing. What comes to mind when we say dina? A poor person, exactly. or becoming selfless by not accepting charity, and being free from egotism. These are also definitions of dainya. I mean, we can maybe bring this up to date, and according to Desha Kalapatra, we can say, in this time, place, and circumstance, people also talk about low self-esteem. You see? And this is absolute anathema in North America. I was talking with Govindacharan the other day, and we were discussing, was it Govindacharan or somebody? How many times do you find a seminar or a place where students or trainees are being inducted in the ideology of becoming a follower? Isn't it? What are we generally encouraged to become? Leaders, invariably. Always we want to become a leader. Leadership skills, leadership seminar. Leaders, qualities of leaders. Where do you ever find any encouragement to become a humble, invisible follower? Never. It is against the spirit of the material world. But that is exactly what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says is the ultimate goal. Tvad bhritya bhritya paricharaka bhritya bhritya bhrityasya bhritya iti mam smaralokanatha. Not only Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Kulashekara Alwar said the same thing. 7 times, isn't it? Tvad bhritya bhritya paricharaka bhritya bhritya bhrityasya bhritya. Yeah, 7. Iti mam smara lokanata. My dear Lord, my prayer at the conclusion of all my sojourn throughout material existence is just this thing. Please consider me to be the servant of 7 other servants. At least 7. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said likewise. So, this is dainya. So, someone might say that the quality of thinking oneself very fallen may also be seen in persons who are simply lazy, or those who abandon auspicious work or indulge in sinful acts. They're also called dina, isn't it? Dina hina jata chilo harinama uddharilo tar sakhi jagai madhai, Narottam Das Thakur sings. So a fallen person is also dina. Therefore, Narad specifies that one who actually has dainya is endowed with all good qualities. That's the difference. That's one difference at least. For instance, such a person observes positive and negative regulations. What does that mean? Positive and negative regulations means? In Sanskrit, it's easier to understand. Vidhi nishedha, or chodana vishedha. Because you always have, this is called, in logic, this is called anvaya vyatireki pervasion, vyapti. You have to cover all your bases, so the best way to define something is both directly and indirectly, or a positive and negative. Always remember Krishna, and everything is covered. There's no possible scope for any other existence, correct? So this is called anvaya vyatireki. Therefore, we find throughout the Shastras, generally that the injunctions are given like this. There's a positive thing you have to do, there's a negative thing you cannot do. Chant 16 rounds, positive. Avoid these 4 sinful activities, negative. Right? Same. So like that. So Narad specifies that one who actually has dainya is endowed with all good qualities. For instance, such a person observes positive and negative regulations. He is free of false ego. Someone asked about this the other night, false ego. We have ego. There's nothing wrong with ego, in fact. Generally, people in the material world, because they're infected by some degree of mayavad, whether it's intuitive or actually trained, they consider that ego is bad by nature. Ego, we don't want ego, it's a bad thing. He's egoistic, right? There's actually nothing wrong with ego. We always take care to qualify this with the adjective false. False ego. False ego is bad. Real ego is natural. It's what you are, in fact. You're not your body, but only in the material world. In the spiritual world, you are your body. And so is Krishna. So you are your ego in the spiritual world as well. Spiritual life is not really a question of evaluating what you do without respect to what you are. Spiritual life is first and foremost evaluating what you are, and secondly, what you do. This is a very, very important thing. And this causes people to become fearful. I mentioned a moment ago, bhayam dvitiyabhinaveshata syat ishadapetasya viparya yosmriti, Bhagavatam tells us. When a person entertains something non-Krishna, for example, Varnashram sans Krishna, then that person is immediately blessed with a companion from that point on. That companion's name is Bhaya, fear. And you have to carry this companion with you everywhere you go, because that's the nature of that choice. So, lost my train of thought now. Yeah, people are infected with Mayavad to the extent that they just assume that anything, ego is bad. But actually only false ego is bad. And false ego means that I am something other than Krishna's servant. That's false ego. When we actually embrace the principle that I am a servant, that I'm a follower, that I'm small, that I'm insignificant, that I'm dependent, etc. All the things that are anathema in this mundane realm. And keep Krishna in the center of that. Then you become very advanced. And lo and behold, you also become decorated with all exalted qualities by that very mentality. Because the soul is shining with all qualifications. Yas yasti bhaktir bhagavati akinchana sarvayar gunais tatra samasate suraha. Why do the demigods have all good qualities? They're mentioned in that verse. They only have all good qualifications because they have approached this level of submission to Krishna. Dvau bhuta sargau lokesmin daiva asura evacha, right? Vishnu bhakta smrto daiva asuras tad viparya. To the extent that we become Vishnu's devotee, to that extent we develop all the good qualities that are innate within us. Not develop, they manifest, they reveal themselves, they become prakat, so to speak. And when we turn away from Krishna and try to identify with something else, then it's like double-clicking on your real ego. And that becomes minimized. The program is still running, but the desktop is cluttered by everything else. Car, family, job, prestige, money, adi, adi, adi. You see? And in that realm, a person considers that anything egoistic is necessarily bad, because it certainly is in the mundane realm. Ego is a bad thing in the mundane realm, but that's false ego. This is the point. There is a real ego. So Narad Muni is talking about this. So he says, and he has a healthy fear of material life. Unhealthy fear is that you're afraid of dying. Or you're afraid of your spiritual identity. This is something that Prabhupada talks about in a wonderful purport that is unique in all of his books. It is Bhagavad Gita chapter 4, text number 10. Make a note of that and study it very carefully. Srila Prabhupada repeats the same things again and again throughout that purport. Basically the three things that Krishna lists in the verse. Anybody know the verse? Krodha, Putamad bhavam agataha. They came to me after being purified of their false ego. Krishna says, many of them in the past, implying that you can do this now also. It can be done still. And what does that entail? Vita, raga, bhaya, krodha. These three things have to be conquered. Raga means attachment to sense gratification or material life, and generally. It's attachment even to our false ego, essentially, is the root of it. That's the opposite of jnana, which is the root of prema. We have this false ego. So raga. then bhaya means we're afraid of our spiritual life. We're afraid. What does it mean? We think, well, I've been a person in the material world and I've suffered so intensely because of my personality or because of my personal relationships. I was speaking with someone the other day in Washington that we take careful training for every major decision we make in life, isn't it? Which graduate school should I go to? Which job should I accept? Who do I marry? So many things. But when it comes to actually sustaining a relationship, we have got no training. We're just thrown out there on our own. And therefore, we don't know what to do because we're missing a very crucial aspect that defines a human being. What is that? Sambandha Gyan. Sambandha Gyan means not only knowledge of our relationship with the Supreme Lord, of course, that's the supreme manifestation of Sambandha Gyan. And who is the presiding deity who distributes this, or withholds, as the case may be, this Sambandha Gyan? Madan Mohan. He's standing in our midst, gracing us with his exalted presence. Virajamana. So, this Sambandha Gyan also means to understand the nature of all relationships. It's a general compound. It doesn't say Krishna Sambandha Gyan. Sambandha Gyan bas. So to understand relationships, that's why we were talking about Varnashram a moment ago. That's why that's important also, because Varnashram is the science of relationships. It's the process for ordering our relationships. In ancient Vedic language, this natural ordering of relationships is called rita. Rita. Sarvam etad ritam manye, Arjuna tells Krishna. I accept everything you say as this cosmic order that organizes the coursing of all beings within this world and beyond it. So Sambandha Gyan is very essential. And because we don't have Sambandha Gyan, we suffer in our relationships in this material world, or we can't sustain relationships. People get divorced, for example. People get whatever it is. So many things happen. So therefore, when we with frame of reference being only this mundane material existence, the nature of relationships based on false ego, then when someone proposes that you've got eternal personality, eternal relationships, an eternal position, an eternal ego, and it's already fixed, that is the most frightening thing in the world for many people. So therefore they say, no. Satyam Brahma Satya Jagan Mithya. The only thing real is this impersonal. Buddhism is also like this. Buddhism is so popular today because people are not only they burnt out by the highly pungent nature of the lifestyle that we live, but they're afraid of more relationships. They just want to snuff everything out. Nirvana. Nirvana means you take a diya and you snuff it out. It's literally what it means, to snuff yourself out. Nihilism. And, of course, there's no authority in Buddhism, and you're supposed to be nice to everybody. These are the virtues that it preaches. Whether they follow it or not is another matter. People like Tina Turner are Buddhists, for your information. So, anyway, so that's bhaya. And then krodha. What does Prabhupada say about krodha? Anybody familiar with this purport? You can say. What does he say? Krodha means not literally anger, but in Sanskrit, we have some words, they mean other words also. Dharma is one of those words. It has about 24 meanings. And, mana means not only your mind, but also your heart. Similarly, krodha means not only anger, but frustration. We are frustrated. We go through so many experiences, we've heard so many things from so many different people. Some of them are flawed, some of them look good, but we're just confused and we just can't handle it and need some time out. You see? This is called krodha, and Prabhupada discusses those people also in that purport. Savita raga bhaya krodha, what is it? Manmaya mam upashata. Krishna says, when we can conquer these things and take shelter of Him, then we can also achieve the same destination that all these other people have achieved previously. Now it's interesting, just to go back on one of those terms, raga, because we're talking about raga bhakti here. You replace raga with raga. But they're in opposite realms. This is the point. One of them is on the red side of the line, and the other one is on the black side of the line. So raga. And actually krodha as well, and bhaya, right? All these things are possible in Krishna consciousness, and we're reading about them in the Brhad Bhagavatamrta. We read about them the other night when we saw this very colorful discussion going on in Dwarka between all different kinds of devotees with different kinds of opinions and different relationships and attachments to Krishna, either positive or negative. You see? So, Narad specifies that one who actually has dainya is endowed with all good qualities. And then he's listed them. So the last one is a healthy fear of material life we were discussing. Furthermore, although Narad doesn't say so, transcendental dainya is a state of extreme agitation that can lead to tears. You sure you want to continue on this path? What happens when you chant Hare Krishna? You go back to Godhead. What happens when you go back to Godhead? I'll tell you. Yashoda one day was doing her household work. She put Krishna outside on the blanket. He's sleeping peacefully. No problem. She's busying herself around the house doing this and that. She glances out the window and she sees these huge, ominous thunderclouds assembled there and beginning to rumble. And she thought, oh my God, Krishna's outside. I'm going to have to do something. By the time she got to the doorway, there was a whirlwind coming. And he took off with Krishna was not where she left him. Can you imagine? Is this what you want? One saint in Vrindavan said, if you want peace, worship Lakshmi Narayana. If you want bliss, worship Radha Krishna. And the implication, unspoken, is that you may get bliss, but you will not have any peace. Have you experienced this? Because this material world is actually just an inverse reflection, or as Prabhupada said, a better word he uses, perverted reflection of the actual reality. The things that cause us so much suffering and irritation and heartache in this material world, those are the things that cause us ecstasy in the spiritual world. Does that sound like a good deal? It is. But we don't have faith. This is the problem. And we don't have faith because we don't have dainya. Ado shraddha tata sadhu sangata bhajana kriya ityadi. We know that the beginning of advancement is faith, and we don't have that. And the reason we don't have faith is because we don't have dainya. Dainya means, another definition given elsewhere by Srila Prabhupada, to be aware of one's shortcomings. If we're truly aware of our shortcomings, then we're ready to listen to what somebody else has to say. We think we know everything. What have you done with your life? Look at yourself in the mirror. Even you've got a good body this time, how long is it going to last? Even if you've got a sound mind, it's definitely going to dissolve in due course of time. Everything in this world evaporates. It's just a question of time. I've seen people change radically, even within one lifetime. Just, a change of the planetary administration of their prarabdha karma, and the whole personality changes. I've seen it. See? So these are the things that are implicit here. Transcendental dainya is a state of extreme agitation that can lead to tears and other ecstatic outbreaks. I was reading a little bit in Padyavali yesterday, We were considering whether to read it here. It's just really, it's too deep, but after Krishna left for Mathura, the state that Srimati Radharani and her friends were in, it's unspeakable, but maybe poets, and Rupa Goswami has assembled a few of them, they can say something that gives us an indication. And the thing that we have to consider, I mentioned the other night, is that it's like dry ice. Ice is actually very cold, but it burns when we touch it, dry ice. And similarly, this ecstasy that we find in Vipralambha Bhav, separation from Krishna in particular, it actually is ecstatic bliss, but it manifests with the appearance of pain. And it may be the best consolation that we can approach here from our side of the picture, from our vantage point, with all of our flaws, is the one that Rupa Goswami suggests indirectly by the way that he divides his system of theology, rasa siddhanta. Raise your hand if you've seen a movie. Everybody's shy. I know you've seen movies. You're Indians. So when we see a movie, I mean American movies, for example, American movies are not considered to be commercially viable unless there's a certain amount of sex and violence. I think it was Steven Spielberg who said that, what red-blooded American doesn't like to see people getting blown up? So if we see a war movie in particular, people are getting blown to bits on the screen in front of us, and we pay to go and see this. It doesn't bother us. Why is that? Because we know they're just actors. We don't feel any pain ourselves. It's all mental only. We're in a funny sort of way, we're actually transcendental to that process of wholesale slaughter of human beings. Because we know that it's not really slaughter, you see? We're in a transcendental perspective. Rupa Goswami saw this 500 years ago. Actually, even 1,000 years ago they saw this. Rupa Goswami just, he made it explicit in terms of theology. But Indian dramaticians saw that when you see a dramatic play, or nowadays we watch movies instead, this is what we do. We put ourselves in a transcendental perspective wherein we don't suffer. And even the pain that goes on, first of all, it's not our pain. And secondly, it's not pain, it's entertainment. You see? In the spiritual world, therefore this is a crude analogy. It's only crude. In the spiritual world, we may be suffering intensely through the ways and means of bhakti and through Krishna's inscrutable will. Srimati Radharani said, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu quotes, Ashlishyava paradatam pinashtamam adarshanat maramahatam karuduva yatha tatha va viridhatu lampata mat prananatas sa eva naparaha. He's lampata, after all. What is lampata? It's a very strong word, is it not? Very strong word. He's a rascal. He's a reprobate. He's incorrigible. Cur. This is what she calls him. But he's my prananata. She goes so far as to say that she curses herself. Now I've realized, after Krishna left for Mathura, she says, I've realized my worst possible fear. And that worst possible fear is that he's gone and I didn't go with him. Why didn't my life depart when he departed? This is what she says. That's what it means, prananata, praneshwara, Lord of my life. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu prays in her voice that he may embrace me if he likes. He may break my heart by killing that thing which is the most, we all cherish something within our hearts, isn't it? And we're very careful not to reveal that to anyone, right? Every one of us has something that we're keeping, some ideal or some attachment that is most Most dear thing. That's called marnama. Marnama, the most sensitive issue. And we're not going to talk about that freely with just anybody, right? We may not talk to anybody about it. So sacred do we hold these things. So that's the thing she's talking about. And that is her attachment to Krishna. And the way he behaves, he kills it. Marnamahatam. He can embrace me or he can kill me by dashing my hopes in this way. But yatha vavidhatu lampata, a rascal will do anything. We know that he has no rules, Krishna. That's who can my friends say that I'm the one to blame, and they're right, she says. But he's my praneshwara. He's my prananatha. I love him anyways. So Dainya. This is her Dainya. Text 223. An intelligent person should carefully cultivate speech, behavior, and thinking that fix him in utter humility. And anything that stands in the way of it, he should avoid. We were talking about smarta culture a minute ago, or rather Varnashram society, Sanatan society. If we analyze all the rules and regulations, the vidhis and the nishedas of the Shastra, we will find that they're actually intended to bring us to this point. This is a hallmark of Paramparagat Bharatiya Sanskriti, is this principle that humility permeates the civilization and is encouraged at every step. That's why the Indians are so much beloved of the multinational corporations. They make such wonderful servants. They're ready, eager, willing. You see? When it becomes perverted, it really becomes perverted. And we're seeing that now. And this is in all facets of the culture are like this. They either directly or indirectly they should propel one towards a higher degree of humility. Dainya. And that's kind of a spin-off of what it means when we say that sarva vidhi nishedhasyur eta yoriva kinkara smartavyam satatam vishnur vismartavnam najatuchit. Because you cannot remember Krishna without humility. And you cannot remember Krishna if you lack humility. This is the point. So this is why he's saying this. Now in the next verse, Dainya at its most exalted comes forth when prema, pure love of God, reaches full maturity, as it did in the women of Gokula when they were separated from Krishna. We've already been discussing this. Commentary. Ordinary dainya can be developed by human effort, but there is also a type of dainya beyond the mundane. That comes from receiving the Supreme Lord's favor, mercy. The word tu in this verse contrasts these distinct kinds of dainya. Almost everyone in the material world is separated from Krishna, but most people never experience dainya because they have no prema. Therefore, they can never become free from suffering and attain true happiness. To achieve transcendental dainya, one must learn to love Krishna in the mood felt by the gopis, led by Sri Radha, when Krishna left them to go to Mathura. We can understand from the example of the gopis' viraha bhava, their feelings of love in separation, that this special dainya arises only when by Sri Krishna's exceptional mercy, a devotee who has realized Krishna's sweetness develops extraordinary prema in his heart in the mood of separation. As prema appears in degrees of excellence, so does dainya. Text 225. When dainya fully matures, prema unfolds without limit. And so we see dainya and prema acting in a relationship in which each is both cause and effect. Srila Prabhupada used to say that in Krishna consciousness, the ends and the means are the same thing. Commentary: if prema is supposed to be the final result of all devotional endeavors, how can dainya be a consequence of prema? If prema is supposed to be the final result of all devotional endeavors, then how can dainya be a consequence of prema? He just said this in the previous purport. Those who were listening caught it. In answer, yes, prema is the final goal, but dainya is not altogether different from prema. Dainya is an integral component of prema, and both foster one another. It is a misunderstanding to think that because there is always another level of perfection to achieve, one can never reach the supreme goal of life. That's a very important point also. Sometimes, not sometimes, pretty regularly we judge others, or we even try to judge ourselves also. And a few verses ago we heard that a person the nature of a person with dainya feels himself very fallen even though he's endowed with excellent qualities. Well, who decides that the excellent qualities are there? Krishna. He's the X factor here. You can never understand what's on Krishna's mind. That's the problem. You also always know that he's up to something, but you never know what it is. You never really know. Just like when Srila Prabhupada was here, most of his disciples were a little bit afraid of him because you never knew, is he going to be very blissful? Is he going to be in joking mood? Is he going to be angry? Is he going to be very grave? You don't know what's on his mind. Gravity. What does gravity mean? You can't understand what that person's thinking. This is the quality, one quality of Krishna. It's the quality of a devotee as well. So, it is a misunderstanding to think that because there is always another level of perfection to achieve, one can never reach the supreme goal of life. What the progressive development of prema shows is not that there is no goal, but that in spiritual life there is endless variety. Endless variety. By pure love for the lotus feet of Sri Gopinath, the fruit one achieves is the attainment of Sri Goloka. By that attainment, the direct sight of Sri Gopinath. By that direct vision, his special mercy. By that mercy, the highest ecstasies of Vidya Bhava, and so on. There is endless sequence. This endless sequence is not a fault, but simply the unfolding of spiritual variety. Even in Vaikuntha, what to speak of Goloka, the bliss of devotional service unfolds in an infinite variety that puts the happiness of liberation to shame. So devotees, even perfect devotees in the spiritual world, they're thinking, I have to advance further. From our perspective, they're already perfect. But from their perspective, I've got to advance further. I don't know anything about this. Srimati Radharani, you see? Dear brother, those who know the essence of prema recognize its presence when the melting of a devotee's heart gives rise to trembling and other such outward signs. The external symptom is the ecstatic symptoms that are listed. The internal system is the melting of the heart, which we cannot see. They're inside and outside. For those who have prema, the blazing conflagration of their agony is like the nectarine water of the Yamuna, and yet like the burning flames of a fire. To them, poison is like nectar, and nectar like poison. Death is happiness, and life is but an expansion of misery. Therefore, when Gopakumar, in the first volume earlier, when he first entered Vrajadham, he looked around and he saw all these people emaciated, bewildered, crying, and he couldn't figure out, are they experiencing the deepest agony, or are they experiencing some ineffable ecstasy? He couldn't quite distinguish which one are they. And furthermore, he also couldn't distinguish, am I in Goloka Vrindavan or am I in Gokula Vrindavan? They're the same thing. Again, in Padyavali, there are many verses that say like this. Srimati Radharani is trying to explain her condition, and we don't really have words to fit these feelings. The language is insufficient. And she says, The wonder of this prema is that it makes ice like fire and makes fire like ice. How can we explain this? Indeed, because one cannot clearly tell between coming together with the object of prema and being separated from it, prema is full of both the greatest ecstasy and the worst anguish. A devotee under the influence of prema loses the power to discriminate between ecstasy and misery. For example, in the final chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam's 10th canto, we find that Krishna's queens, after enjoying water sports with Krishna, lamented the pain of their separation from him, even though he was still present with them. The nature of bhakti is such that it generates all varieties of emotions, especially as it develops towards its extreme limits. Even in ordinary life, things taken to their extremes can seem to change into their opposites. The coldest ice may feel hot to the touch, like fire. We've already described this. Devotees advanced in prema enjoy the company of the personality of Godhead, the embodiment of supreme bliss. They delight in the special joy derived from taking part in his wonderful pastimes. But by the extraordinary nature of bhakti, in the very midst of that enjoyment appears the pain of separation. The ecstasy of separation, indeed, is the ripe fruit of fully developed prema and is one of its essential components, just as hunger is an essential part of the complete enjoyment of eating. However, it may appear superficially, the happiness of prema in separation is the rarest treasure. In previous chapters of Brhad Bhagavatamrta, this has already been discussed, and in the last 2 chapters, it will be clarified still further. When prema matures, one inevitably acts from time to time in the ways of an utter madman. And without such prema, not even the 9 kinds of devotional service to Lord Mukunda can bring real happiness. Indeed, without prema, the 9 kinds of devotional service are like vegetables without salt, an elaborate meal without hunger, scriptural study without understanding, or gardens without fruit. This also is something that can give rise to humility as necessary. We've already discussed that the means and the ends are the same. So if you develop prema, you can develop humility. If you develop humility, you can develop prema. If a meal without hunger is not appreciable, right? Anyone ever had this experience? You're not hungry, but the wonderful prasadam, but it means nothing to you, you see? If they bring you a sabzi without salt, if you have a garden but there's no flowers, there's no fruits in it, well, what is the use? Just, plants. You see? So in the same way, we can develop humility by recognizing that something very essential is missing in my devotional service. I don't have prema. Srila Sanatana Goswami, of all people, the author of this book, so deep in his realizations of what is prema, he says elsewhere, Na prema shravanadi bhaktirapiva yoga athava vaishnavo. I don't have any prema. I don't even have any real attachment to the process of developing prema. That is sadhana bhakti. I'm not a Vaishnava. I don't have any pious credits to my name. I don't have any transcendental knowledge. I've never practiced yoga. I've got no means by which I might elevate myself. I'm not even born of a nice family, he says. Is that true? He was what they call GSB. They were from Karnataka. So, I'm bereft of all means. Therefore, I'm simply taking shelter of you, O Gopi Janavallabha, and I've got some hope against hope, and this hope is giving me great pain. Only I have this hope, and I know that you will carry me. So, Narad Muni continues here. Once we understand that when we're missing this prema, even though we're following the process of Krishna consciousness, then we can actually develop some humility, then we begin to make advancement. Because we are convinced, I've not reached the goal. We all think we're doing fine, isn't it? I'm doing pretty good. I'm chanting my rounds, I'm maintaining. We're missing prema. How many people cry as soon as they chant the name of Gauranga? Not very many. Some people do. Some. They do. Even now they do. Narad continues. I'm saying something general about this love, but it cannot be described in full detail. How can I adequately tell of the nature of the pure love of the women of Vraja? Commentary. The general characteristics of prema can be seen in devotees of some of Krishna's avatars and in the servants of Sri Vaikunthanatha. But the love that Sri Radhika and her followers offer to Sri Nandanandana is so exceptional that Narad feels he has no authority to speak about it. So who are we? When Krishna went to Mathura city, the cowherd women were plunged at once into a state more intense than the fire of universal annihilation. The simple truth is that the cause of this state was prema. Had they no love, why should they feel like that? Please, I beg you, do not try to delve into this any deeper, Narad Muni tells Gopakumar. Feeling himself unqualified to explain the essence of the gopis' prema, Narad here again says only a little about this prema in terms of its secondary characteristics. He is fearful of proceeding further because a further description might make both Gopakumar and himself lose control of their ecstasy. If you ever meet the divine goddess Radhika, then you will see prema in person. Shri Radhe! And if ever she speaks about prema, only then can you hear the truth about it, if you are able to understand it. Commentary. Narad can hardly describe the nature of the gopis' pure love, and even if with great endeavor he could, that love is something Gopakumar's heart is not yet prepared to realize. But if Gopakumar were to meet a person who in truth possesses that love, then he would be able to perceive it directly. Of all the Lord's gopis, Srimati Radharani is famous as the most dear to the Lord. If Gopakumar could meet her, she could explain the truth about her love for Krishna, how supremely ecstatic it is, how supremely painful and distressing, and so on. Even if Narad could receive such instructions from Srimati Radharani, he would not be able to repeat them to Gopakumar because those instructions would render Narad completely bewildered like a madman. Thus, Gopakumar will only be able to learn the mysteries of this most exalted science by seeing them for himself, in the person of its original teacher, Srimati Radharani. Or should there ever be a full incarnation of Sri Krishna Chandra to distribute pure Krishna prema, or to experience the Krishna prema of Srimati Radhika, you might be able to understand it. Everybody caught the hint here? Commentary. Since Srimati Radharani is rarely seen by ordinary souls in this world, Gopakumar might doubt whether a modern person like himself could ever get her favor and understand her glories. But if she were not the only source of prema in this world, the conditioned souls would not need to be hopeless. To protect the hope of Gopakumar and other devotees to obtain love at the lotus feet of Sri Radhika and the Lord of her heart, here Narad hints at the future appearance of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the combined form of Sri Radha and Krishna. For even subtly alluding to the merciful descent of Lord Chaitanya, Narad is all glorious. So, dear son of Vrajabhumi, To fulfill your desires, go quickly to Lord Jagannath's abode, the holy place that is an image of Mathura. Unlike me, you are surely a person in whom the Lord has reposed his mercy. Commentary. Gopakumar should not be discouraged that Narad has declared the prema of Vraja extremely difficult to achieve. Narad himself may not expect to attain such prema, but Gopakumar, born in Vraj and blessed with so much of Krishna's mercy, is more fortunate. I'm going to end here. Does anybody have any comments or any questions on anything we've discussed so far? There's too much. Yes.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you very much. It was an enlivening, very, very nice discussion. Thank you very much. In the beginning of the session, you talked about Nam Sankirtan. There was some reference to that, where it was saying that to glorify the qualities of the Lord or names. So I got that question, what is the exact meaning of Nam Sankirtan? Our japa is also Nam Sankirtan, chanting of the holy names, chanting the pastimes, or chanting bhajans. What is Nam Sankirtan?
As you know, in Krishna consciousness, because it's dynamic, there are sometimes multiple definitions. There are multiple definitions of a Vaishnava. There are multiple definitions of so many things. So Nam Sankirtan generally means chanting of the holy names, as opposed to other kinds of Sankirtan, Lila Kirtan, or Gunagan, we say Guna Kirtan, chanting of the Lord's qualities. But here Narad has given his own definition, which I'll try to read again, because I also noted that it was very interesting. One who develops that love by practicing devotional service whose main ways are meditation on and singing about the many Vraja pastimes of the Lord. One develops that love in these ways. That service becomes brilliant by Sankirtan of the Lord's most beloved holy names. I'll read the commentary over again, it's short. Vaidhi sadhana bhakti, which consists of 9 basic devotional practices, beginning with hearing, chanting, and remembering, prepares a devotee's heart for the awakening of prema, love of God. Dhyana and Gana, the general methods of remembering and chanting about the Supreme Lord and his pastimes, transform, in the advanced stages of sadhana, into Preshtanama Sankirtan, ecstatic absorption in the nectarian names of one's worshipable Lord. This Sankirtana is the most essential means for achieving prema. By Nama Sankirtan, one easily realizes the full glories of Krishna and his pleasure potency. What is the essential ingredient that's being emphasized here? Prema Sankirtana. That's right. Again, it's the same thing that we hear later on. So he's talking about dhyana and he's talking about gana. Dhyana comes naturally by remembering, or even by hearing. Gana may be glorifying the Lord in so many ways. But when one actually feels an upsurge of love for the Lord, he can only sing the Lord's names. And that attracts the Lord more than anything else. You want to get Krishna's attention, you sing with love and with tears and dancing in the association of other pure devotees, and then the Lord will respond. Radhe Radhe Rakho Chale Aayenge Bihari. That's the meaning. Okay.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you for the nice class. I wanted to ask the question, and maybe you can elaborate more. There was a term in the beginning, frailties like fear.
Frailties, yeah.
And especially, I was expecting that maybe lust, envy, or greed he will use, but he used fear, and elsewhere Prabhupada...
that was an interesting list, wasn't it? That's why I a little bit emphasized it. You know, what was it? Fear, shame, other things like
reverence.
This. Reverence is also... These are obstacles, you see. Even reverence can be an obstacle because we're not really just seeking after puja. Puja means, or Aishwarya Bhav, to be aware of the Lord's form as Mahanarayana and Vaikuntha. That also obscures intimacy. If we want prema of the residents of Vrindavan, then we have to, anything which is not what they manifest, that becomes an obstacle, in effect. Even though it may be otherwise considered a very good thing. Now, this is another interesting point to note, that depending on our relative stage of adhikar, we may accept something or reject something. And in the Shastra, there are so many different injunctions given for different people in different conditions. When a person, let's say a person who has no background in pious activity, no familiarity with Krishna consciousness or Hinduism or anything, he just happens to set foot inside the temple, for him, it's acceptable to take prasadam all day long. In the beginning, Prabhupada had a barrel full of gulab jamun, and anybody could come anytime and take as much as he wanted. That was the regulator principle, and for that person, this is progress. But for someone to do it after, say, 40 years of devotional service, and in the renounced order of life, and, having had some realizations about the process, then that would not be considered advancement. Right? So everything's relative also. Is that okay? Answering your question?
Yes. I also heard Srila Prabhupada in one of the Ahar Nitra Bhaya Maithunam Cha, he was asking the question, which is the most dangerous? And he said fear. Is that also, does that fear percolate to even our condition, that when we are fearful?
Absolutely. Who's not fearful? Raise your hand if you've never been afraid of anything. We're afraid of what somebody might say about us, right? We're afraid of, my next car insurance payment. We're afraid of so many things. What to speak of death? A friend of ours died last night in the UK. Cancer. Very quickly comes and just takes you away. Last week, another godbrother of mine died. Kurma Rupa Prabhu. He took care of cows in Vrindavan. Such a glorious soul. So, this is natural that we feel fear because we're in a fearful place. It's like a jungle, and there's all the wild animals around us, and most of them are two-legged. Fear is only natural here. You've got everything to be afraid of here. And therefore, he said elsewhere in the commentary, it's good for a devotee to have a healthy fear. Healthy fear. Healthy fear means it inspires Krishna consciousness, or inspires determination to attain Krishna consciousness. Is that okay? Yeah.
Hare Krishna Guruji. I had a question. So we were talking about ahankar a little while ago. So before coming to Krishna consciousness, we used to translate ahankar as ego. But then we learned about true ego and false ego. So is there a corresponding word in Sanskrit for true ego as well?
I'm not following your question. You have to speak a little slower.
Okay, so in Krishna consciousness we have true ego and we have a false ego. So false ego is ahankar.
Actually, in Krishna consciousness we have ego, and in material consciousness we have false ego. We recognize both categories in Krishna consciousness, I think is what you're saying. So your question is?
So is there a corresponding Sanskrit word for true ego? That was my question.
Well, it's just understood that the ego is more of a quality of the self. It's not a separate entity. In this material world, the false ego, These words are only in English. I'm not aware that there's a distinction made in Sanskrit, but it's certainly a theological distinction made by commentators who define these terms. And in the material world we have this false ego, and in the spiritual world we just have what's real. It's not an adhyas or an imposition, as Shankaracharya would put it. In the material world, all these things are anarthas. They're all superimpositions that are artificial. They're covering us, and it's not like that. When everything is uncovered, then the real ego is there. So ego itself is not a bad thing, but it has to be real. It cannot be this false ego. It's kind of like an actor on the stage. He adopts a certain persona on the stage. But if he never comes out of that, he can't really have it. I mean, that's not going to work, right? Something like that. Yes.
Prabhuji, so I heard some part of the lecture on Wednesday also. So there was a point of understanding Krishna. So we know from Bhagavatam, Brahma is saying, those who understand Krishna, but I don't understand Krishna. And then, and many parts of the Prabhupada says, you need to understand Krishna, and then you cannot understand Krishna. So my question is, what we should understand about Krishna, and what we should not try to understand about Krishna?
So you're asking, I think, that we're told that we can't understand Krishna, and we're also told that we should understand Krishna.
Yeah.
So it seems like a contradiction, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Is that it?
Or seems like we need to understand some part of Krishna, and my question is, what is that part? And then what is that part which we need not understand, or did not try to understand? So that is also my question intent.
Well, all understanding, or sambandha jnana, as we were saying earlier, it's essentially relative to our goal. What is it that you want? If you want to attain impersonal peace and try to maintain that stasis forever, then it's good to cultivate ordinary jnana of your atma tattva. But at a certain point in devotional service, this principle of getting realizations is not really such a priority any longer, because just jnana alone is it's mere data, and it's not really going to help you purify your heart. If we want to have a loving relationship or a reciprocal exchange with the Supreme Lord, then we've got a whole different set of priorities. And as far as the first part of your question, we're told that we need to understand Krishna, and at the same time we're informed that we cannot understand Krishna. It sounds like a contradiction, but it's not really, because nobody can understand Krishna in full. Means, another way of saying that is that only Krishna understands himself in full. Nobody else can understand Krishna the way Krishna understands himself, you see? But to understand Krishna in full means that we understand Krishna to our full capacity. Like I have this cup of water, and when the cup is full, it holds this much water. It may hold less water than that, but it cannot hold more water than that. So it's full. It's not all the water that exists in this cup, but the cup is full. So that's one thing. And then another thing is that even if we understand Krishna in full, according to what we've read here, we may not be convinced that we understand Krishna in full. And that's a subjective truth that is also absolute at the same time. And there's no way that you can convince anyone in the mundane realm of how these two reconcile, because logically they don't. That's a very important thing to recognize. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's, there are other Beda-Bhed philosophies. There's a Shaiva Beda-Bhed philosophy, there's Nimbarka Vaishnava Beda-Bhed philosophy, but this is called Achintya Beda-Bhed philosophy, because the principle of Achintya Shakti is so paramount, and it should be emphasized as much as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has emphasized it. his understanding represents the natural and comprehensive synthesis of all other understandings that were articulated before he came. So we can understand Krishna to some degree, but we cannot understand him in full. And we're interested in understanding things about Krishna that are relative to our goal of love of Godhead. And that's very specific. Somebody wants to worship Krishna in the mood of the manjaris. Somebody else wants to worship Krishna in Dwarka as a servant. Someone else wants to worship Mahanarayana in Vaikuntha. Somebody else can only take Jagannath. Somebody only wants Madan Gopal, as we see with Sarup here, or Gopakumar. Somebody else wants Venkatesh, Srinathji, Madan Mohan, so many, Dwarkadish. That's, in the beginning, Narad Muni had said that according to the desire of the heart of that devotee, Krishna will reciprocate. Ase Shrutekshita Pato, ityadi. There's a verse like that also in Bhagavatam. So, therefore, we have to give up our fear of our eternal constitutional position, and we have to cultivate a particular desire. And that should come when the heart is pure. When the heart's not pure, then we just keep distracting ourselves. So the initial desire is to let me learn that I'm not my body. Let me get fundamental understanding of Krishna and his relationship with his energies. Let me understand the process of bhakti and how that works. This is also understanding Krishna. And those things we can understand. Krishna will help us to understand. Is that clear?
I could understand some things about it, but you talked about full capacity, one's own full capacity. Mm-hmm. That's like not very clear to me, because does it mean that each one of us have different capacities?
Yes, that's what it means. Okay. And that's what we're afraid of, because it means that eternally I'm pegged, and we don't like that. Somebody is considered higher, somebody is considered lower, and we don't like that. This is a cardinal sin, especially in American society. Pseudo-egalitarianism is sacrosanct in our culture. And to have a society that's stratified externally, mm-hmm. and to have a goal, a spiritual goal, mind you, that is also hierarchical, okay. That is terrifying to the Western psychology. Or to the modern psychology, because it's everywhere now. We've imported. You see?
Okay. Yeah.
This is a problem. That's what Prabhupada is talking about in chapter 4, text 10, when he's talking about people who are afraid of their spiritual identity. These are some of the aspects, at least. It's a very, very important thing to consider. But we all have a different capacity. But the important thing to note here is that it's not that a person who is a little calf in Goloka Vrindavan feels less satisfied than someone who is serving Srimati Radharani. Or as Mirabai, she was so ambitious, Radharani herself she wanted to become. She wanted to push aside Radharani and take her place. Somebody may, from a mundane perspective, may have that idea as well. But it's not like that. Everybody in Swe Swedhikare Yanishtha Saguna Parikirtitaha. To be situated in exactly what you have the adhikar for, that is considered to be a guna. And to attempt anything else is considered to be a flaw. This principle works either in this world or in that world. There is diversity. There is variety. That's what it means to be not an impersonalist. Because variety is the mother of enjoyment. And bhakti is all about giving Krishna enjoyment. You see? These are very, very important things. You had a comment.
Question. So you said everyone has a limit, and the water can be less in the cup or it can be full. We live in a society where that's contrary to what we expect is available.
That's why we suffer.
So how do we evaluate where we are, how much water we have, and when we should stop because we're full versus becoming frustrated because we can't go anymore?
A very good point. Very, very good question. A very similar question, at least logically analogous question somebody asked Srila Prabhupada. How do we know when Krishna is pleased with our service? And anybody know what Prabhupada said? Simple answer. You ask a simple question, you get a simple answer. Prabhupada said, when he tells you. So we actually don't judge. This is done by the spiritual master or by Krishna. And we follow the directions of the previous authorities, and there are certain social standards that are pre-existing. They're already in place. We just have to follow them. But this is another thing we don't like to do because it militates against the principle that we have adopted as sacrosanct, such as egalitarianism, or I say pseudo-egalitarianism. You see? And we don't want to follow Manava Dharma Shastra because, it's not in sync with our goal. This is the problem. Is that okay?
So Prabhu, we see in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu Rupa Goswami says like 6 limbs of surrender, and Danya is among the first among them. So we see like many places in the scriptures, Danya is being emphasized ahead of those other limbs of the surrender. So why is it so, and why Danya is more important than other branches or other limbs of the surrender?
You're asking why is Danya more important than the 6 limbs of surrender?
Yeah, because we see like Danya is being emphasized everywhere.
Danya.
Yeah, humility or utter humility, what you were saying.
Well, I think that's the point of this passage. It was described by Narad Muni that Danya is really the essence of pure love of Godhead. It's both the essence and the cause and the effect, all at once. And, without that Danya, it's not really bhakti, for that reason. And you may be advised to do other things, but it's kind of assumed there, or it's implicit there in that, these things are what are going to produce this Danya, or these things that are what's going to produce prema. Danya and prema are equated. They're one and the same thing. Prema is really nothing but absolute Danya. This is the point. It is the essence. This is the point that Sanatana Goswami is making, and it's a very deep one. Is that clear?
My question is like, there are other 5 limbs of surrender also, and Dvainu is considered one of them. But here you are saying...
what
like
you're talking about...
Atmanivedan,
Yes.
Gotritya Bharan,
Yes.
Rakshati Krishna, these like 6 limbs. So like Anukulyasya Sankalpam, Pratikulyasya Varjanam. So can we see Dvainu as a part of that, or Dvainu itself, it's like combining all those features?
I think it's both. Like I said, there's different categories. There's different answers to different questions. Some questions have multiple valid answers. It's like, life is like language. And, in language, there's many ways that you can say the same thing. And, the injunctions of the Shastra are like that also. There's many different ways that you can approach something, but the different ways of saying the same thing, they don't necessarily cancel each other out. So I would say it's both. It's a specific category of Sharanagati, but Sharanagati itself is nothing but a manifestation of Danya, so it's Achintya Bheda Bhed, maybe we can say. It's one and it's different at the same time. Is that okay? She had a question in the back.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, very nice class. Prabhu, I have so I was just trying to confirm my understanding of ego and false ego. So false ego is just identifying myself with the body and that I belong to this material world. False conception that I have to lord it over the material nature. And ego is that I am an eternal servant of Krishna.
Right.
Okay.
Real ego means what you are, and false ego means what you aren't. Period. So it's pretty simple. I mean, everybody has an ego, whether they would like to deny it or not. I mean, everyone else has an ego. But you can't say that there's no ego. I mean, we can say like that also. Anahankara, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, but what that means is like nirguna. Nirguna means no qualities, literally. But, it's absurd to say that Krishna has no qualities. That's the problem. Sometimes we speak in negative terms. But that should not erase the fact that there is a validity to ego eternally on the spiritual platform only.
And I also have another question, Prabhu. So you're talking about Ashta Shiva Padaratam Pinastamam. In that context, I didn't understand the description that you mentioned. Would you mind explaining that?
That's a very hard one. That's a very, very hard one. I mean, you can go back and listen to it on the tape, or you can ask someone else, but it's not so much within my capacity to speak very, very deeply on that verse. I mean, I think what I mentioned was that this was a verse that's also included in Rupa Goswami's Padyavali. It was actually spoken by Srimati Radharani, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu included that verse in his Shikshastika. Because it fully embodies the transcendental mood of Srimati Radharani in her surrender into Krishna. She accepts him as her Lord and the Lord of her life, more dear than her life. And that's an eternal fact, even though she's also recognizes that Krishna is fully free to treat them in any way he wants to, and she recognizes that he is a lamparta. What to say? How can I say anything about that? There are commentaries on this verse. Bhaktivinoda Thakur has written extensively on it. You can study those.
Thank you, Prabhu. Most beautiful lecture. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhuji, for the wonderful lecture. Prabhuji, we see that crying is a way a devotee expresses or feels ecstatic symptoms. So it comes from the spiritual world, but even in the material world, when it manifests, we see that even one may be living in full ignorance of Krishna, still crying is a process that makes one feel less agitation, and one feels peaceful after that.
And sometimes even in the material world, people also cry tears of joy. That's a good point.
So how does it reflect from the spiritual world? And
I think you just answered your question, did you not?
Okay.
What is the question?
So is there any parallel between the spiritual crying as well as how it reflects?
Well, the parallels are certain. I mean, it looks to be the same thing. And even the acharyas, for lack of better terminology, they describe it as misery. Or they describe the intense attraction to Krishna as lust. These things are bad in the material world. But because this is only a perverted reflection, what's bad here is actually good there. And, tears are actually ecstatic in the spiritual world. Yam kama krodha sahaja pranayadi bhiti vatsalya moha guru gaurava sevya bhavaihi sanchintya tasya sadrishim tanam apur ete govindam ari purusham tamaham bhajami. It's described in the Brahma Samhita that, whether they're under the sway of love or anger or bewilderment or whatever it is, they develop love for Krishna in that way. But we have to be very careful. What is that? Srila Prabhupada said about the Prakrita Sahajiyas, those who are not actually surrendered to Krishna, but who have the conceit that they are great devotees or feeling some sort of spiritual ecstasy. Prabhupada said for those persons, and they are devotees of a low sort, Prabhupada said for those persons, their tears are simply washing away the scriptural injunctions. But when a person is actually in love of Godhead, then those tears are very powerful. They purify not only himself, but they purify anybody who witnesses them. Lava matra sadhu sangha sarva siddhi hoy. You can get the same perfection just by seeing this. somebody over here also. He was waiting, I think.
Okay, Hare Krishna Prabhu. Actually, my question is related to your, you talked about Sambandha Gyan and faith.
About?
Sambandha Gyan, Sambandha.
Yes.
So basically this together goes together, or because of we have Sambandha, that's what we have to have faith, or we have to have faith, that's what Sambandha developed. And in second question of the part of this
That question is subtle. I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
Okay, so question is this to go to parallel, or we have to have Sambandha, that's what we have to have the faith, or we have to have faith, that's what is the, we can develop the Sambandha.
I think you're asking if there's if one comes before the other one?
Exactly. We should have faith first, or we have to have Sambandha.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of, it's a little tricky to answer that because, in a sense we can say you have to have faith, but, there has to be some subject matter or some object for your faith as well. So they kind of go together. I mean, we all have some degree of Sambandha Gyan. At least we have a word in English for God, for example. In Chinese, there's no such word. They don't have a word for God because there was never any traditional concept of God. They don't require the word because the concept doesn't demand that, right? The concept is lacking. This is called abhav in Sanskrit. It's not something that's there. Similarly, in the English language, I often point out, we don't have a word for dharma because the concept has not, become a prominent part of the modern psychology that might, occasion a need for that word, you see. So Sambandha Gyan is, some degree of Sambandha Gyan is necessary in order for us to repose our faith in it. Yeah, we have to, somebody tells us there's such a thing as God. And if you have a little faith, you can invest in that very basic truth, and then you can move from there. Is that answering your question? Yeah. But then when our realization expands or deepens, when we develop or cultivate or accumulate more Sambandha Gyan, we have to keep reinvesting our faith in that. Because at any state, and any step of the way, if we choose that, no, I don't want this, then we will invest our faith somewhere else, and then progress is cut off at that point. Is that answering your question?
Almost, but second part of this is because we are in the Grihastha ashram, and in the Grihastha, basically we have to have faith, right? So for example, like with your wife or with your...
Everybody has to have faith in any ashram.
And because Sambandha come first, or faith, that's what I was trying to...
It sounds to me like you're interpreting the word Sambandha as relatives.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? I don't see why it's a Grihastha specific problem. It's just that everybody needs faith. And everybody actually has faith also. It's just that Grihasthas tend to be distracted. Maybe that's what you're saying. We're distracted by our relatives. That's why I've lost count of the number of NRIs who tell me that, if we stayed in India, we never would have become Krishna conscious. Because if your grandmother, grandfather, then they just engage you as day-long babysitter. And, other people, they engage you in some other way. It's very difficult. Sambandha, in this material world, so many rishtas can become an obstacle. That's a problem unique to the Grihastha ashram. But faith everybody needs. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, Hare Krishna Prabhuji, thank you for sharing so many insights in this chapter of Prem. So you mentioned 2 points, that always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna.
This is the scriptural injunction I quoted.
Yeah, so what's the difference between the two? Basically, they don't mean the same?
No, one of them is positive coverage and the other one is negative coverage. There are 4 kinds of coverage in logic. You can say that you make a positive statement that, do this. The negative statement is don't do that, right? Anyway, we don't need to go into that level of detail, but the point is that there's no possibility of misinterpreting the instruction when it is stated in these ways, both positively and negatively. So, because we all look at things according to our frame of reference and according to our mindset and our psychology, and especially according to our desires. So if we're desiring to not remember Krishna, then we may take only the never forget Krishna thing seriously, and then there's some room for there's some wiggle room is left there, as we say. You see. So it's just it's just a question of making it more explicit, maybe is a way to put it. Yeah, airtight, maybe something waterproof, something, whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. You mentioned about the process of Sharanagati in one of the discussions that happened, where you mentioned about Varnashram Dharma and Krishna recommending that Sarva Dharman Parityaja, and then he's saying that Jagyadantapa Karma Natyajyamiti Chapare. Also in the Brahma Samhita there is this verse that...
What that means, by the way, is that never give up your karma means that you reevaluate your karma in terms of bhakti. See it as something bhakti-centric rather than karma-centric. That's the point.
And also in
but at the end of the day, although we have many ways to interpret Bhagavad Gita, everyone will agree that Arjuna is going to do what? He's going to fight. He's going to do his dharma. That's the point.
So I just wanted your insight on this word, that in Bhagavad Gita the word is Sarva Dharman Parityaja, and in Brahma Samhita Krishna is saying that Dharman Anyan Parityaja Mamekam Bhaja Vishwasan. So definitely, as you explained, that everything has to be evaluated in terms of progression in bhakti.
And accepted or rejected as well, but always in terms of bhakti. When it's favorable to bhakti, we accept. When it's not favorable, we reject. And the way we tell the difference is the spiritual master. He tells the difference. The spiritual master's order is the active ingredient. It's the primary principle, the essential principle of spiritual life.
So, in other words, if all the activities that we do, we still continue to do, it's just that we have to do it for developing Krishna consciousness. It's not like we are recommended to give up the activities and sit idle.
Generally, that's the case. When one is very advanced, Krishna also says in Bhagavad Gita, Yastu atma ratireva syat. That is to say, when you never ever take pleasure in anything that is non-spiritual, then you have no karya. Karya means kaj. It's the same word. So, that's a very advanced stage, and it's also pretty rare. So we need to be a little conscious of that. I mean, if I can say so, that in ISKCON we tend to think ourselves more advanced than we really are in this respect. And that's why the majority of the funding for the GBC has been given for the several years now to the Child Protection Office, which protects ISKCON members from other ISKCON members. So this is where Dainya is practical also. If we have a realistic sense of our self-identity and our position, our adhikar, then we see in the Bhagavatam this is how the devotees act. They still are following all the karmas, they're still following all the Sanatana culture, everything is there. But they're completely given to Krishna. Otherwise, it's a recipe for social chaos, which we see. Loka sangraham evapi, Krishna says, if only to keep the society together, then for that reason also do this. Puravait puravakritam. Do whatever the ancients did, that you should do. When a person is in doubt about dharma, Manu says, then you should do whatever your predecessors did. You'll never go off if you do that. Ramanuja also says the same thing, commenting on this Charma Shloka, 1865. So, but the point is that the consciousness has to be on Krishna. Tantre niveshitatiyo vayameva yavat, Krishne niveshitatiyo vayameva tavat. I quoted this verse before from Bilvamangala Thakur. You're going to waste your time in dharma when your concept of dharma is something other than Krishna. Or when Krishna doesn't want you to do dharma, because sometimes that also happens, very rarely. But in Kurukshetra it happened, in Vrindavan it happened. Sometimes Krishna, very intimate, surrendered devotees, he will tell them he told Yudhishthira to tell a lie, you see? But that's very, very rare. More rare than we assume, I think. It would seem that way, you see? So this is the idea of sarva dharman paritijya. We give up the concept of anything that's, that I'm going to embrace anything other than Krishna. We're 100% Krishna-centric. That's the point. Now, therefore, it makes it a coincidental fact that we are concerned about varnashram. And the reason is because we find these instructions throughout Srila Prabhupada's books. You see? But our concern is not varnashram. Our concern is Prabhupada, the order of the spiritual master. Our concern is bhakti. It's pure bhakti. It's not guna bhakti or anything extrinsic. Even though Ramananda Roy and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in their discussion, Mahaprabhu said that this is etobahya, right? He actually said it's external. But that's true for other people. It's not true for us, because we're in ISKCON. This is another subtlety that is lost on many people, but it's a very important one. We were following the order of the spiritual master. That is essential, the most essential thing for bhakti. Is it clear? I don't want to dilate on this point too much because it's not the point of the verse. Okay? You've been waiting patiently a long time.
And thank you, Prabhu, for giving another chance to ask a question. So, different devotees have inclinations to see Krishna in certain forms. So, how do they relate with other forms?
This is a very good point which is described in at least one Chaitanya Charitamrita purport that I'm thinking of, and also in the Bhagavatam. I think it's second canto, and I forget the verse, but throughout his books, Srila Prabhupada emphasizes the need to see all the different forms of the Lord equally, at least on our stage of advancement, and the default social standard should be that one offers equal respects to all bona fide forms of the Lord. It may be that if and when one makes a great deal of spiritual advancement, one can begin to discriminate amongst the different forms of the Lord. And it's always true that we at least mentally, we have a natural attachment to one form of the Lord or another. But we have to be very respectful. Advaitam, Achyutam, Anadim, and Antarupam. This is the principle. And we should give all respect. What was it? There was one devotee in Vrindavan that I remember some years ago who was just discussing that, something about Lakshmi Narayana and said, oh, yeah, but that's just Lakshmi Narayana. Just Lakshmi Narayana? That's a very dangerous mentality that Prabhupada warns about. We may have as the ideal of our acharyas to worship Radha Krishna, even exclusively, at a certain stage of advancement, but we should be very careful about that, and we should always offer respects to other forms of the Lord. What to speak of other forms of the Lord? Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would visit temples of demigods, even, to offer respects as well. So, I'll offer respects to all devotees. Offer respects also to non-devotees. But Shakale Shamman Korite Shakti Dehonatha Jatha Jatha. Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, you please give me the ability to properly respect all other living beings, but Jatha Jatha, accordingly to their station. Again, this is the principle we mentioned earlier about hierarchy and stratification, which is so much repulsive to the modern mind. But it's an essential part of our tradition, and it's a very important one. We should, if we are interested in following the third verse of Shikshastika, to amanina manadena kirtaniya sadahari, if we appreciate that we can chant all the time only when we're able to respect all others, then we have to learn how to do it. And we have to substantiate that process with reference to our gurus, our sadhus, and our shastras. I'm attempting to do that. Is that okay? Anything else?
Roger, regarding the same question that he has, past time came into my mind and you can comment on it. And so I've heard that when the gopis were with Krishna and suddenly Krishna disappeared, then Krishna took a form of four-handed form of Vishnu. And so can you comment on that pastime with this relation?
There's many things to comment on that pastime.
I mean, his question, how did pure devotees, gopis, relate to Narayan at that very point?
That's a very good question. At that time, in the heat of the moment, you might say, the gopis, they happened to see Lord Vishnu standing in the bushes, and they said, "Oh, Hare Krishna Narayan, have you seen Krishna?" Let me give you further insight into the nature of the Vrajavasi psychology. Once I was in Vrindavan, and we were riding in a rickshaw. The rickshawala was an Nimbarka Vaishnava. It takes all kinds. And, everybody in Vrindavan is a Vaishnava. The shopwalas, the rickshawalas, everybody. So we were passing by one, in India, every corner there's a Hanuman shrine or there's Ganesh or something, orange deity with eyes. So we're driving by and he sees the Hanuman and he says, "Radhe Radhe Hanuman." This is Vraja Bhakti. We're concerned with Hanuman as Sankarta Mochana because we're sunk in Sankarta. But the Vrajavasi is Haribol! And particularly Radhe Radhe. So, Hanuman, he's there in Vrindavan too. It takes all kinds. Even in Dwarka, we read the other night about Padmavati. It would seem, be careful here, it would seem that she did not have prema, because she was in deep illusion about certain things, but she's also part of the Leela. That's how it manifests. So we have to be so careful. General principle, do not offend anyone. And, there's a social standard pre-existing for that purpose in the form of Varnashram. I mean, Prabhupada, in the end of his instructions, he gave us this mandate that we cooperate together and sustain this mission. That was his instruction in 1977. At the same time that he gave that instruction, he was emphasizing this necessity of Varnashram, which I see as the very valuable means of actually doing that. How are you going to cooperate unless you can agree on how to cooperate? And the Shastra should be telling us this. What does Krishna say in chapter 16 of Bhagavad Gita? Text number 23 or 4 is it? I don't remember. Yes. He says you should determine it. Karya, yashas, what is it? No. Anyway, he says you should understand what is to be done and what is not to be done on the basis of what the Shastra enjoins. And we've been mentioning what the Shastra enjoins here. It's pretty clear if we're reading the Shastra. Here people read the Shastra. That's one of the great ornaments of this community. ISKCON Silicon Valley. In many places they don't. So Sambandha Gyan, as you were saying, this is how we get it. We hear from the spiritual master. Otherwise we're going to misinterpret the spiritual master and misunderstand so many things. Okay? Yeah, here's another one. It's getting late now, but we'll take at least one more question. Anybody else dying with a question? Okay, 2 more questions I'll take, then we have to cut it off.
You had made a couple of examples from Manusmriti as a Dharma Shastra. There have been many different Dharma Shastras, and Manusmriti is one of the oldest. And I've heard that the newer ones that have come afterwards have superseded, and Manusmriti is less relevant for today's age.
I don't have an authoritative judgment on that question. It's true that there are many, many Dharma Shastras. As a matter of fact, one scholar, Klaus Klostermeier, he's a good friend of ISKCON, and he even spent some time with Srila Prabhupada before Srila Prabhupada came to America. In Vrindavan, he's a special person. So he wrote a book called The Survey of Hinduism, and in that book he mentions that actually the single most body of writing that exists in Sanskrit is the Dharma Shastra. Why? Because the Dharma Shastra attempts to take these abstract philosophical and theological conclusions and apply them to a concrete ground reality in a specific time, place, and circumstance. And you've got to be very specific in order to do that. You've got to, as we were mentioning with regard to logic, you've got to cover every base and make sure it's very clear and no room for a misunderstanding. So yeah, it's true that there are many Dharma Shastras, and Srila Prabhupada quotes from many of them. He quotes from Yajnavalkya, he quotes from others. It seems to me, and this is just my impression from having read Srila Prabhupada's books for many, many years, that Srila Prabhupada refers to Manu in a general way, but also he refers to him in a specific way as well. He certainly accepts Manu's authority. I think more powerful than the references that we find in Srila Prabhupada's books is a Shruti mantra in the Taittiriya Samhita, which says that whatever Manu says is medicine. That is a very clear and infallible endorsement of Manu's authority. So that's something we have to respect, even though it's a fact that many of the injunctions in the Manusmriti seem to be outdated, and they have to be applied with a great deal of discrimination and more than that, realization, and maybe even more than that, empathy, and maybe even more than that, compassion. So these are important points. Does that answer your question? There's, like I said, there's Yajnavalkya, there's another one that our acharyas have quoted, I've seen is, what is his name? Harita is another one. Yajnavalkya, Manu, there are many of them. But Manu is considered to be, he's like the Sridhar Swami of the Dharma Shastra world. You know, you can't really get very far with Bhagavatam without Sridhar Swami. And nobody will accept you even if you do think you've gotten far with it. So it's like that. And as I said, even the Shruti endorses Manu, so and therefore it's not surprising that Prabhupada does so as well.
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you for nice class and discussion. Prabhu, my question is like, whenever we go for book distribution, and especially we approach some Indian family, and when we talk about Krishna and Bhagavatam, and then most of the time, I would say like once a month it happens, some person is get agitated within 10 minutes, say, why you speak Krishna, Krishna only, nothing else. So we at the time, trying to rectify the situation and say we respect other form of the Lord. But what should be our answer in first meeting to prove that, Krishna is the, not prove, but, like make them, like understand that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead?
Well, I mentioned the other night that Laghu Bhagavatamrta is just the book you need for this purpose. It's the book in which Rupa Goswami substantiates a lot of the assumptions that this book implicitly makes with reference to other shastras. And his arguments are also very brilliant and comprehensive. It's a very, very in-depth analysis of this principle that Krishna is the supreme original personality of Godhead. With regards to how you deal with people that you meet on Sankirtan, it's as always, it depends on the adhikar of that person. Desha kala patra, patra means the recipient. So, you have to consider whether they're Hindu or not, whether they're Americans, whether they're envious, whether they're this or that. I mean, all these things have to be taken into consideration. In some places, we don't even mention the name of Krishna. In some places, we just only obliquely refer even to God. You see, it all depends. This is again why the Shastras are so varied and seem to be complicated, because they're addressing different adhikars in different times, places, and circumstances. Is that okay? That's a general answer for a general question.
Yeah, but sometimes these families are like grew up in Brahmin family in India, like South India or in North India, and they have the really good culture about it. Mm-hmm. And after talking, and then still you say like why only Krishna? They have a general view well, it's a good question. I don't blame them for asking. They should ask that question. Yeah.
As I said, it is for those people that Rupa Goswami wrote Laghu Bhagavatamrta. wherein he basically unpacks this whole principle. It's like an expanded commentary on Ete Chamsha Kala Pungsa, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. It's a touchy subject. There are emotions involved as well, because after all, this is love. And yeah, so you have to be very careful. But again, if there's a social standard that's in place wherein we respect all forms of the Lord, and not only the forms of the Lord, we respect all living beings according to their adhikar, then that should be good. I mean, we are also going to temples of Venkatesh. I stayed in Tiruchendra this winter and was visiting the temple of Skanda as well, as did Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in all likelihood. So, I think one thing we can say for sure is that if we manifest in our character, because what we are is more important than what we do, if we manifest this principle of dainya, humility, acknowledging our own shortcomings and giving all respect to others, as per the Shikshastakam, then people will always be satisfied. This was Prabhupada's experience and example. Prabhupada, sometimes people they were completely inimical when they came to Prabhupada. They would ask challenging questions, but he was so humble and he was so unrelenting and uncompromising, but in a sweet way, that by the time they left, everybody was their friends and happy and full of prasadam. So this is the art.
Yeah, thank you, Prabhu. Yeah.
Okay? All right, thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna. Sorry, we have to go to Folsom for an evening program there. So that's why we have to cut short. And Prabhu will be back here tomorrow evening for the Sunday feast at 4 o'clock. Hare Krishna.